Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. My name is Peter Struzero. I'm the director of the Belmont Public Library. We welcome you to our 7th Open Public Forum. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to turn over immediately to the chair of our building committee, Claire Colburn, who's going to begin our slides for us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for those of you who have the bandwidth after a lot of town activity in the past couple of weeks to come join us and hear more about the new library project. As Peter mentioned, this is our 7th forum, our community forum. So we look to have many more. I just wanted to, back up a moment and thank our friends at the Belmont Media Center who are streaming this for us tonight. And to talk a little bit about the project overall. So the first thing I want to mention is that with input from 7 community forums, with numerous feasibility studies, we've been working on this for over a decade, actually over 2 decades. And it's not a project that has just come up in the middle of the night. It is well vetted. It has been transparent. All the information is on the website. And if you have any trouble finding it, please reach out to us. So just, if you come away with nothing more, just to understand the breadth and the depth of information that we have there supporting this project. But also just to mention that this project is in schematic design phase, which is not the final design for the project. And as we get more and more community input, we will be making adjustments and fine-tuning the design so that it is a library for our town and of our people. So next I want to turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Claire. So just to note, we're getting lots of chats already and questions. That's great. So we're going to go through our presentation and then we're going to look to answer those questions afterwards. So we thank you for bearing with us and listening to our speech. If you do have questions, feel free to go and put them in the Q&A. And we've got support staff that are going to be checking that throughout. So again, good evening all. My name is Peter Struzero. I'm the director of the Belmont Public Library. I want to be crisp and to the point tonight to yield time to our many other speakers. Claire told me that she wanted me to speak to the building and the way it's failing right now. And I said, that's great. I think I can fit it all into about 15 minutes. She said, you can have 2. And I said, all right, fine, 10. And she said, you get 2. So here goes. The roof leaks whenever it rains. The foundation floods whenever that happens. The drains on the ground floor don't work. The electrical system is constantly failing. The HVAC system is completely problematic. Our new air compressor exploded after only 3 years because it couldn't handle the responsibility of the system that it's attached to, which is ancient. The boiler is new and works well, but we can't benefit from most of the capabilities that it has, again, because it can't speak well to the system that it's connected to. The air ducts are falling apart, held together by duct tape. All entryways and outdoor staircases are code violations and trip hazards. Doors don't work. Mechanics all are falling apart. Repairs and expensive replacements are constant. The windows don't work. Some won't open, some won't stay open at all. The locking systems don't really work. Our fire alarm system fails on the regular. The elevator also breaks regularly. The floors are asbestos in most of the flooring throughout the library. The wood doors seem to be asbestos inside too. All the inner wall materials are unknown, but I have a guess what's inside them. None of this speaks to the fact that we are grossly non-compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's embarrassing. Those with mobility issues cannot access any parts of the library save for the children's room without going into the small, worrisome elevator. If they have mobility equipment like wheelchairs or walkers or other assistance devices, they can't fit into that dangerous elevator in the first place. A handful of times a year, I see patrons in wheelchairs on the main floor, always with a family member or 2. After several difficult and sad interactions, I no longer need to go and bother them because I know the answer to my question about how they even got in here with their wheelchair. The answer is embarrassing. It usually is my husband and son carried my wheelchair up the front stairs. I don't have any time tonight for fun stories, unfortunately, so I won't be able to tell you about the time I was stuck in the elevator for a half an hour with a case of snacks for a kids program. I definitely won't be able to tell you about the February night I spent the entire night in the boiler room waiting for an antique plumber to come down from Laconia after our plumber at 11 p.m. told me, I think I'm going to need to call my dad. at 1 p.m. to help me stop the boiling water that was pouring out of a busted water exchange, or the many times electricians, fire safety inspectors, and HV repair crews have said, wow, oh wait, that's the system I'm supposed to be working on? I just thought you never removed the old one. And I definitely won't be able to tell you about how fun it is to empty the bucket strapped to the ceilings after rainstorms, only to find ham sandwiches floating in the water. Or maybe the time when the pipes busted in a staff member's office, and to make up for it, we agreed to let her paint the wall purple the following week. I don't have time to tell you about all those great adventures tonight, but there are lots of stories. I could do a whole presentation myself about the current building and the current need. So I do encourage you to seek me out at the library. I want to tag in the vice chair of our Board of Library Trustees and Building Committee, Kathy Cohane, who's going to progress our slides forward.
Okay. So before we move on, thank you, Peter. And I think we get a lot of questions from folks about why hasn't the building been maintained? And let's stay on this slide so I can just make sure I cover it and set the right context for folks. So we do maintain the building. You know, if it's health and safety, we do repair it. We do address what we can. The issue we have for the library is that we need investment. We need investment in all of the major building systems, the majority of which are original to the building, which was built in 1965. And as Peter was stating, when we have replaced them, the boiler as an example, getting that equipment to work, you know, with downstream 1965 equipment is a challenge. So we did work, the trustees did work with CHA, and I know Jeff Birnbaum is in the audience and will join us later on if people have follow-up questions, to take a look at what could we do? What are all the building systems that need to be repaired? And what would it take? We met also with the Capital Budget Committee, and I know Anne-Marie Mahoney is here. Thank you both. And you know, we don't have the money in the capital budget to do the repairs. The other issue that we have is, given the size of the repairs, is that we would trigger ADA compliance. If we spend more than $1.8 million over a rolling three-year period, it will require us to come completely up to code. So if we go to the next slide, this is what a building system repair option is. This would address, it's not a renovation, it is really addressing the core infrastructure of the library, the things that Peter highlighted as failing. It would also do things, it would bring us to code compliance, but it doesn't do everything. As you can see from the box on the side, it doesn't meet our space requirements because we lose, in fact, 25% of our space, usable space today, to be code compliant. So bottom line, if we are, we have an option to repair the building, it will be between $28 and $30 million. And I think really, given hidden conditions, given the age of the equipment, given what is not spec'd into this figure, it's likely to be at the higher end. So our options really as a community, given where we are with this building, is a repair project at 30 million or a new building. If we were to do a repair, we as library trustees and the community would be asking for an addition. That's not factored in here. So repair is not an option. And Jeff, I know, will be happy to answer questions when we get to Q&A. So I think important for people to have that context. Before us as taxpayers is not a new building or nothing. We're looking at a 30 million repair or a new building. Next slide, please. So in terms of utilization, I think we shared these statistics with folks before. These are 2019 numbers, they're pre-pandemic, but I can assure you that our usage continues to climb and is starting to approach pre-pandemic levels. And we are on track to have the second busiest circulation year in the library's history, which is quite a feat with the fact that we've not had people in the building for many of those months. We just resumed in-person programming in March of this year. So there to be approaching a second utilization level is just amazing. We have seen, as people probably have experienced themselves, an increase in people using e-materials, but we have also seen in the recent months a real return to paper and printed materials. And in particular, we see that in the children's area. So these are good numbers. We all want to return to normal. We are almost there, and we will continue to grow and get there. Next slide. Again, just to remind people of the path that we've been on, the identification of needing to do something to the library began back in 1999 with the building needs assessment, which then created a feasibility study back in 2001. There have been multiple studies, Claire will touch on this, over the years, over the last 20 odd years. Each of them examined a renovation of the existing building, renovation and addition, and a new building. And Claire will speak to it, but I think that, let's stay on this just quickly. I think, the key here is community input and making sure that we're touching base with not only community members, community groups, but also the government groups in town, police, fire, planning, and the like. So this really has been, kind of an informed process, either with regulation, fire, or with community inputs, as well as our long-range plan. That's really our strategic plan for the library. We've been at this so long, we've done it twice. We did it in 2021 in the height of the pandemic, because Peter was very keen to gauge how community usage might be shifting with the pandemic. And so that's reflected in our design. Thank you. Next page. Guiding principles, before you start any project, you have key requirements, and these are the guiding principles we had as a building committee. So, well, Peter touched on it. I'll let people read these. I mean, some of these are kind of just basic fundamentals. A gathering place for the community, resources for lifelong learning, whether that be printed materials, electronic materials, the library of things, flexible spaces. We really want to build this for the future. So flexible, not only for today, but for the future, sustainability, and really leveraging the site that we have. Next page. Size. I'll turn it over to Claire to talk about the size and how we as a group, trustees and building committee, came to some of the facts that we have in the design that we have.
And this is a really important issue, and we get questions about this a lot, and I think it's great that we're being held accountable just like every other entity in the town, because dollars get put into square feet. So we need to know what the right size for a library is for us, not for some other town, but for us. So I'll pick up with advancing the size. So how did we determine the size? 3 feasibility studies, as Kathy mentioned, but we also look at the program and service requirements, data. We use data from library usage, sorry for the train noise, from the community, the input from the 6 public forums to date, also from our peer libraries. Peter and also the Belmont Library Foundation and the trustees have met with other neighboring libraries. You've just built a library. What would you wish that you had done instead? Or what things did you leave out that you wish you'd done? Or, what are you so happy that you put in that maybe it was a little bit on the chopping block? Also data from the MBLC, and also finally, from our experts that are part of the design team, Odenzello Architecture, as well as committee members that we have who have extensive knowledge in building libraries and designing libraries, and engineers as well. So just a little bit more about those 3 feasibility studies, 2001, 6, and 17. What was consistent across all of them is that they all recommended new construction. And I could talk for a long time. I'm always happy to explain this to people why that is. I'm not pro new or renovation for any project that I do. It's driven by the site and the parameters of the building, the structure. So in this case, because the site is so constrained, because the structure cannot be added to, and you have to build independently from that, and because of the setbacks, we would have to build a lot of exterior building envelope that would cost a lot more than building new. Looking at the comparison from the existing building to what is proposed for the new library. And we broke this down so that people could see where are the increases and understand them a little bit better. Our children's room gets a lot of use, and there's a lot of data suggesting that building a larger wing that would incorporate reading areas and craft areas and separate spaces would be really advantageous. There's support rooms that need some space right now. I think Peter's staff rooms have been taken over by other functions, and they just don't have adequate space. It's also bathrooms and things like that that are very undersized. So then looking at some of these other ones, meeting spaces is one that over and over again, when we talk to people who have built libraries, neighboring towns, they say, you know, we wish we had more meeting spaces. Group study spaces are used so much. The kids, they work collaboratively now in a way that, you know, most of us did not learn growing up. You know, as the teacher at the front of the room was the source of information. Now everybody's got that information on their phone, right? So it's more about a collaborative work pedagogy. Young adults space grew by about twice. Quiet study rooms gained some space. Periodicals, and you can see in this list what the main drivers are. But I guess the point of the slide is to say that it is sort of sprinkled around. Some of these cases, they're under 1,000 square feet adding on to. They're not large changes, but we feel that they are really important and necessary as we grow and move forward. So here's some of the input that we've heard from our community. I'm not going to read them off. My personal favorite one, though, and this is just to let you know that we didn't make these up, is that the library just needs a big giraffe. So I don't know, Noel, if you've had that direction from a client before that to build a giraffe, but in any case, you see the variety of comments, and that there's another page of them, and we have many more that we didn't share. But you know, increasing the hours, Noel is going to walk us through the plans and show how we can do that in a very smart, intentional way of allowing access for evening hours that doesn't involve access throughout the whole library. So it reduces the drain on staff and facilities and custodial services. Virtual meeting rooms and technology is another thing that came up before the pandemic, and we know it's even more true now. So this is some other data that was gathered. This is from 2018. But looking at neighboring towns and seeing what their libraries, I think these are all within 10 years of 2018. And so looking at their population to square foot. So you'll see a trend of, you know, the larger libraries will have a lower number typically per square foot per capita, and the smaller ones will typically have a higher one. So looking at the average overall is 2 feet per square feet per person in town. The average between for our population is 1.6, and that's where our proposed building falls squarely in the middle of. So it's not grossly oversized. We tried to vet this in a number of ways, use information from the MBLC and our experts, but also looking at what other people have. Can we do more for less? We're finding that this is the right amount for us. All right, so looking at cost. So we have revised this number even from the last time we reported it. So it has come down a little bit. It's not a lot, but we're trying to get everything we can. And also just to talk about how we feel comfortable with this number. So 2019 was when schematic design ended, and we had our estimates done by two entities, the design team as well as through the owner's project manager. So those are independent of each other, just as a kind of check, make sure that nobody's wildly off, that we're not missing something. So that was done in 2019 and obviously needed to be updated before we go to a vote, because those numbers are not informative anymore with the market. The first thing we did, though, was to look at, okay, what does it cost to repair the systems? And that was the estimate that Kathy walked through in summary. And then we also had both entities, again, re-estimate the building. And one way we could have done this was to throw an extra number on it and just sort of raise the cost all together. But we actually had the two entities go through line by line and revise their numbers, because there's just so many different changes and we wanted to be responsible and capture those. So 39.5 is the current cost of the library. By current, I mean escalated out for the design phases and construction. Okay, so what are those increases from 2019? As I mentioned, a lot of them are construction costs due in part to a volatile market due to COVID. There have been two scope changes that I just want to mention. They're not enormous, but they're significant. One is an increase to our technology budget, because we know moving forward there's going to be a greater dependency on hybrid meetings and technology in general. The other is $80,000 going to salvage historic items like the Veterans Memorial and stained glass, which we hope we get a CPA grant for, but we wanted to capture that in the budget and return that money if it's not needed. And then we, on top of the typical contingencies and safeguards for a budget, we added 5% for market volatility, because we wanted to be careful. If we don't spend that money, fantastic, it never gets pulled from the town. We hope that's the case, but we wanted to safeguard and be cautious. So a little bit more fun conversation is about the funds that have been that are available to date, and these are from pledges and donations, and the response has been incredible. We're hoping, and we heard word about a $1 million state bond bill. Want to hear more about that, and it's very exciting if it goes through. Potential CPA grants, as I mentioned, but we're also pursuing, and by we I mean the Belmont Library Foundation, which Kathy and I are also a part of, are pursuing grants from local banks, a number of different banks and foundations. And we're happy to entertain, if somebody's got a good suggestion, happy to pursue that as well. Okay, so lastly, I want to talk about the time frame, just generically. So we're in this engagement, fundraising, education phase right now. The vote will be in November of 2022. The idea would be that we would design for about a year, and then go out to bid, and then break ground in March of 24 with an opening in June of 25. So I'd like to turn that over to Noel and Glenn as they walk us through the design.
Thank you, Claire and Peter and Kathy. My name is Noel Murphy with Odin's LO Architecture, and I'm joined by one of our collaborators, Glenn Valentine from Stimson Landscape Studio, based in Cambridge. And we are going to walk you through the building and introduce you to some of the ideas behind the plans that you'll see this evening, as well as show you the layout of the building and some of the kind of the spaces and materials and things that are coming together to be the future library. Next slide. There it is. We're starting with what looks like a finished image, a completed design, shovels in the ground tomorrow. But in reality, this is one step in an iterative process that will hopefully continue. And as part of that process, we'll continue to engage with you all, the community, as well as town agencies and departments and other experts in the various fields that will contribute to the final library building. So I just want to caution everyone that this is a very exciting point in the process, but certainly not the end of the process. And we're still here to hear feedback and get input as this design can continue to develop down the road. Next slide. So stepping back a bit from what is the appearance of a finished building to some of the first principles that were kind of the generative ideas for the design. We like to start with developing an attitude about how a building can engage its context and its site. And this particular site, the site of the existing library, offers many exciting opportunities. And so one of the initial ideas behind the library and how it's situated was to think about the library as a building in the round. So not a building with the conventional front and back, but a building that engages all sides of the site. So a building that has a civic presence on Concord Avenue, but also has a presence and a relationship to Wellington Brook. And we really want to give a voice to Wellington Brook and create a place and a landscape on the south side of the building that ties the building to the brook. On the east side of the building, there's parking, but not only parking, there's an existing wildflower garden that we are preserving. And that is one of the motivations behind trying to bring the landscape around the building along the brook to continue all of that great work that's already happened with the wildflower garden. And then on the opposite side of the building is the Underwood property, which, although it is a wet green space, it will always be a green space. And it gives this site, which is quite constrained space-wise, kind of a point or a moment of relief, and allows us to bring the building really close to the property line, but not feel like it's up against another structure or confined in any way. And we can actually kind of gesture and open the building up to the open space next to the Underwood pool. Next slide. This is the site plan, which I'll let Glenn explain in more detail. But in terms of the general organization of the site plan, as I mentioned before, this site offers a lot of opportunities, such as the brook and the wildflower garden and Concord Avenue, which is such an important thoroughfare in Belmont. But there's also a number of challenges in terms of balancing a building of this size. We're increasing the footprint of the library, balancing that with parking, and also the need to really protect and preserve, and as much as we can, increase the amount of softscape on the site as a matter of treating stormwater, creating a welcoming environment, but also in terms of protecting the brook into the future. So parking in this scheme is consolidated on the west side of the building. The rear driveway in the east section of parking that exists currently would be removed and replaced with a portion of the building structure, and this beautiful landscape that Stimson has designed. If you can go to the next slide, Claire. And this slide, it provides a comparison between the existing library footprint and the new library footprint. So as you can see, the new library is expanding to the north and the east. Parking is situated to the west. And although the parking is doesn't feel like it's growing in any way, we're actually able to add 17 spaces and bring the total number of spaces up to 42 spaces, which is on par with what we have now, and we'll get into that on the next slide. But one other thing I wanted to point out as a constraint is due to the proximity to the brook, it's a sensitive landscape, and there's what is called the redevelopment boundary between the existing building and the brook, which is defined mostly by the edge of the existing asphalt kind of apron of the parking and driveway, but also by a certain offset off of the brook, which is a kind of an environmental regulation. So that is another constraint that kind of limits where we can introduce parking, roadways, and things like that on the site. Next slide. So looking at the parking layout, we're maintaining the existing entrance, kind of the in point of access along Concord Avenue, and the parking is organized as a one-way loop with handicap parking and a drop-off aisle adjacent to the building on the side of the building where the entrance is located. In total, we're adding one spot, so we're increasing from 41 spaces to 42 spaces. We do get the added benefit of that drop-off area for quick drop-offs, pickups and things like that would otherwise potentially congest traffic and movements through the parking. We also have incorporated a dedicated book drop, a vehicular book drop, so books could be returned without leaving your car. That's something that we're seeing more and more demand for. And there's also opportunities for additional parking, not directly on the library site. There's parking on Concord Avenue and potentially at the pool in the high school. And I think one of the advantages to the existing library site is its location being on Concord Avenue and serviced by bike lanes and bus routes, and within a really short distance to the middle school and high school. Next slide. Highlighting a few of the existing features of the site that have influenced the direction of the design. So there's a few slides addressing that. The first of which is showing the existing condition along Concord Avenue where the entrance is bermed up and you have to access it via a ramp and steps, which Peter mentioned earlier is certainly not an accessible way to get into a building. So one of the first principles of this project is to bring the building and entrance down to grade so that the entry is right at the street level and sidewalk level. So there's no ramping, there are no stairs between parking and the building entrance. Next slide. This is a photograph of the Golden Bowl at the Underwood Pool site. And removing, if you look into the distance, removing some of those trees and things and opening up that edge so that the library would have a presence on this lawn space. And it would also allow the library to overlook this space so it doesn't feel so tightly contained on the site. Next slide. And then finally, the brook, which Glenn will speak more to, but trying to really kind of unlock the potential of this brook as a place to be and appreciate and learn about. And the library really does, as we're proposing it, a lot to engage with this brook and make it part of the experience of the site. Next slide. Getting into the building, this is a kind of a cut through of the ground floor of the building. Concord Avenue is kind of the bottom left hand side of the image. Wellington Brooks, the upper right hand side of the image, just to orient everyone. Next slide. For reference, this is the existing library footprint. Next slide. And the new library, so we're growing by about, I think it's about around 7,000 square feet in terms of just footprint area on the site. Next slide. And then I'll walk through, kind of navigate you through the library spaces on the first floor, and then we'll move up to the second floor. So this is going to be kind of a tour of the building, kind of piece by piece or space by space. The entrance is situated between Concord Avenue and the parking, kind of a corner entrance, and is covered by a cantilever of the upper floor. And along that entry path are a book drop and a new Veterans Memorial that would replace the existing panels that are in the library entrance. There are plans to salvage and relocate those existing panels to another location. Next slide. The central organizing space of the building is what we're calling the library commons. And the commons would be a patron's kind of point of arrival and primary point of engagement with library staff. It's the location of circulation desk, self-checkout. So everyone would be moving through the space as they enter and as they leave with books. It also opens up views through the building and between spaces in the building. And as you'll see in the next image, it's a two-story space. So it allows a lot of daylight kind of really deep into the building. So it's, part of its purpose is to really amplify the daylight in the building and improve kind of the human comfort level for everyone using the building at both floors. And this is intended to be a very dynamic space. I think on a daily basis, it's going to be a space displaying new materials, having some informal seating, provide space for evolving types of collections, such as the Library of Things, which, if you're not familiar with that term, it's something that's becoming more common in libraries, but it involves, checking out cookware for your kitchen, garden tools, and things like that aren't traditionally, they're certainly not books and things that you would normally go to a library for, but there's a demand for them, and libraries are starting to offer these quote unquote things. And so this space also sponsors the presentation of that collection within the building. And it's also a very flexible space and can be reconfigured. You'll see that the shelving are on casters and can be moved out of the way to allow for art exhibits, speaker talks, author talks. You could have a large Friends book sale in this space once a year. So it can do many, many things, some of which we probably haven't even thought of yet. But it really is a kind of a place for people to engage with the community, with the books, and with larger groups when there's opportunities to do that. Next slide. On the other side of the commons is the children's room, which is very close to the entrance. I won't go into every detail of these spaces in the interest of time, but the children's room includes a dedicated craft room, which currently the library does not have. So that would be turned over and cleaned, but not something that needs to be hosting a wide range of events like an assembly room would. Next slide. This is a view of the children's room. Next slide. At the back side of the building, oriented to the brook landscape, are the meeting rooms. There's a community room, which is larger, but would serve a similar purpose to the current assembly room, and a smaller meeting room, which is comparable to the flat room. Next slide. And one of the kind of fundamental kind of thoughts behind the layout of these spaces is to consolidate the meeting rooms around bathrooms and allow for an after hours section of the building with a dedicated entrance that could be opened after the staff leaves without having to keep the entire library open and staff in the building. So this would be accessible to the public for meetings at all times. And there's a gate that would secure it off from all of the other parts of the building. Next slide. This is a view of the community room. You could even, the events could flow out to the landscape outside directly from this meeting space. Next slide. And then there's a dedicated section or wing of the building for staff and support. Next slide. On the upper floor, you can see the library common space extends up through the center of the building as a two-story space. Next slide. And that is ringed by all of the adult collections and seating areas. The adult collection also kind of was oriented towards and opens to the Underwood lawn, and there's an outdoor reading porch space that's part of the secure perimeter of the library. We could take a book outside on a nice day and read outside. And there's a view of that coming up. Next slide. This is overlooking the commons on the upper floor. You can see that there's windows ringing the top of this higher portion of the building to bring daylight deep in to this space and then down to the lower floor. Next slide. And this view shows that outdoor reading porch with the Underwood pool in the background. Next slide. There's a dedicated space for young adults over the entrance, kind of a pride of place in the building for that group. Next slide. And a view of the young adult space. All of these spaces are intended to be flexible. Most of the kind of delineation between sections of spaces is achieved through furniture and shelving rather than fixed partitions and things. There's kind of a common theme throughout the building. Next slide. Flanking the west end of the adults, or sorry, the east end, I guess, of the adult section there's a creative kind of bank of rooms there's a makerspace, film and music studios for kind of all sorts of creative ventures that can be undertaken in these kind of purpose-built spaces. And there's another bank of rooms dedicated to local history, including kind of a salvaging and relocating of the existing Claflin room into this location on the upper floor of the new building. Next slide. And then what I'm sure will be very popular spaces. There are 8 quiet study rooms. These are spaces for small group study that you could reserve, close the door. It could be a place for tutoring. It could be a place for a phone call or a meeting such as this if you're participating via Zoom and needed a quiet space to be. This is a view looking through those rooms with the landscape behind. So these would be overlooking kind of that woodland landscape along the brook. Next slide. And then finally, the staff and support on the upper floor, which is stacked right above the lower floor with a stairway linking the two. Next slide. The mechanical spaces are predominantly located up in a penthouse. There's no basement in the building, and kind of in the interest of resilience, we've raised it up to the top portion of the building. Next slide. And then this higher roof is an opportunity for a PV array. Given the area we have available here, this would be sufficient to generate about 30 to 40% of energy demand for the building, so on-site generation. I think there may be opportunities to increase this, and that's certainly something. I said this was an iterative process that we'll continue to look at as we move further into the project. Next slide. And then embedded in the project is kind of an awareness of and attention to sustainability. I know that's certainly a big interest in everyone's mind today, in particular in the Belmont community, which is very exciting to us. And I won't read, every word on this slide, but the approach to sustainability is, it's really threefold. I think there's kind of the technical side of things in terms of building systems, high performance building envelope, solar panels. There's the ecological component, how we're addressing stormwater, the types of plantings that we're utilizing. We're proposing native species, and also human comfort, so things that aren't quite as quantifiable, but I've mentioned several times natural daylight, and a landscape that kind of encourages activity and movement and links to a larger system of paths throughout throughout Belmont. Next slide. And then finally, this is kind of the last series on the architectural side. A series of slides on the architectural side is how we are thinking about the materiality of the building. We know there's a strong history and tradition of brick production in Belmont, and next slide. And it's also really the predominant material in the municipal buildings historically. And we are attracted to brick, both for its beauty, but also it is it's a low cost, low maintenance, durable material. So it's a sensible material. Next slide. So brick is really the primary exterior material for the building. We have done work on, I know this view in particular shows kind of an expansive amount of glass. We have done work to reduce the amount of glass, and I think that's, again, one of the things as part of this process that we'll continue to scrutinize. I think we're at around 39% of the envelope is glazed currently. At one point, I think it was closer to 50. So we're making strides there. And that central section corresponds to the library commons, which translates all the way through the building as a kind of a transparent space. And the upper level, the higher section of the building is it's a phenolic panel, but there's some products that have a nice warmth to them. So that's what we'd be seeking there, not a metal panel or something, but something that feels a little bit warmer in color. Next slide. And this is returning to the first view we looked at. This is a view of the corner of the building where the entrance is located along Concord Avenue. So it gives you a sense of the scale within the context of kind of Concord Avenue and the landscape beyond. Now I'm going to hand it off to Glenn Valentine from Stimson to walk us through the landscape.
Okay, thanks, Noel. You can go to the next slide, please. So here is a diagram of the library in the context of the surrounding open spaces, and they're both public and private. You can see the light green or yellowish color, the adjacent public spaces of the high school, Underwood Pool, and Wellington Elementary School, and the private open space of the historic Underwood Estate. And in our scheme, which we'll show you in a second, we are devising ways to connect to those through both pathways and through opening views and vistas into some of those precious private woodland and open spaces on the south side of the building. We also see tying into the community path in the future as an exciting opportunity for this space, really providing a unique kind of environment added into the experience of that path because of the nearby crossings of Concord Ave. And finally, this diagram illustrates the amount of daylight of Wellington Brook through this part of the town. It's really very rare. This is the only kind of daylighted section of this scale anywhere in the town of Belmont, and the only public access to it is at our library site. Next slide. Noel showed you an aerial view of Wellington Brook before, but you really only get a sense of it when you get down to this water level. Many people don't even know it exists in Belmont because it's 6 to 8 feet below the level of the adjacent pathways and land. But once you get down to this level, even this image in the heart of winter shows you how beautiful this resource is. It's armored all the way along both sides by stone, but it was done in such a manner with these natural stones to retain its very beautiful and kind of organic natural character. Also, when you get down to this level, it has a unique quality, which is auditory. It has a very strong, but at the same time gentle and soothing sound, which removes you from the surrounding context and makes it a fully immersive experience. Next. This is from earlier today. I went by, and this is, you see today and in the summer and spring, what a truly green oasis this corridor is. And you'll also notice that even after this morning's storms, it's quite clear of debris. So it has this really pristine kind of quality, which is very unique. Next. This diagram just shows some of the basic breakdown of the spaces on the site, which Noel was alluding to. And that big green arrow shows the basic concept of trying to connect this Wellington Brook corridor out to Concord Avenue and make it visible. We've done this in a number of different ways. One, by pulling back from the edge of Wellington Brook, particularly on the east side of the site, removing that barrier of the roadway around the entire site and giving it just more room to breathe. And also through the vehicle of the Library Commons and all that glass, literally making it visible from Concord Avenue for people passing by. You'll also see a couple of the other major spaces, which is the Woodland Garden, the Belmont Garden Club maintains, a truly unique resource on the site. That Civic Plaza, it's just the idea of bringing the space down to the level of Concord Ave, making it fully ADA accessible and welcoming to everyone. And the beginning of an outdoor space, this green terrace, connecting over to the Underwood Pool and the Underwood Lawn. Next. This diagram shows some of the spaces we're thinking of developing in this plan. On the left-hand side, you'll see two stormwater gardens. One is related to runoff from the parking lot. The water from the parking lot will run into this swale in the center of the space, and then into a series of tiered landscapes, which will cleanse and infiltrate the water, all of the water, before it reaches Wellington Brook. Currently, as you probably know, or some of you know, the water flows directly from the surface in this far left corner into Wellington Brook, completely untreated. Closer to the building, we're going to pick up all the runoff from the roof and the terraces and run that through a stormwater channel along the west side of the building, starting out at Concord Ave with a very visible stormwater garden, run it along that corridor, picking up roof water, and then filter and infiltrate that again before it enters Wellington Brook. Along the south side of the building, you see a series of outdoor spaces, these green kind of boxes, and each one of them really extends an indoor function of the library towards this new space that we've created along Wellington Brook by removing the roadway. Near the new south entrance, we're envisioning a small reading lawn and kind of lunch relaxation area with benches. And further to the east, Noel mentioned this events terrace, which is tied directly to the community room, and we can see people spilling out into that space that would be canopied by trees. And also adjacent to the children's wing, an enclosed and fully secure outdoor reading and play space for children in that area. Also, this outdoor classroom, I'll show you some more details of that, but that's a truly unique space pulled away from the library a little bit, which is much more focused on Wellington Brook itself. Next. This image without those focus group bubbles on it shows you a little bit how this landscape is envisioned as kind of one continuous garden running along Wellington Brook. You can see this sinuous gray pathway, which is a fully accessible walkway connecting all of these outdoor spaces together and tying into the woodland garden on the west side and into the Underwood lawn on the east. Along the way, also tying into the south entrance or brook entrance to the library, and to the accessible spaces at the parking lot. This also just shows you how that garden is really envisioned as one landscape, which has a kind of consistent character, highlighting both these stormwater gardens and outdoor spaces, all of them focusing attention and visibility on Wellington Brook. Next. Here's an aerial shot to give you a little bit better sense of the character of this space we're envisioning. We're really picturing it as a woodland garden with understory trees, native understory trees, native canopy trees, ground covers and shrubs, developing all layers of the woodland garden canopy, and threading that through the entire space along the brook. This slide also illustrates that stormwater garden I mentioned, starting out all the way out of Concord Avenue and running along the south side of the garden until it gets to a basin next to this reading lawn shown in the foreground of the image, where water will be infiltrated and cleansed before entering the stream. Next. And this image from the other end of the series of outdoor spaces shows that Brookside Amphitheater or gathering space, which would be lowered 2, maybe even 4 feet from the existing walkway to get you much closer to the level of Wellington Brook itself, get you more of an experience like that first image that I showed, where you can see the water moving and you can actually hear the sound of the stream when you're sitting in this space, making people aware of its presence and really appreciating it in a new way. We see this as an outdoor classroom, a place for impromptu performances, maybe poetry readings, a very flexible kind of space. And we're also envisioning it that it may even flood and be a space that adds to the floodplain of the Wellington Brook, which up until this time has just lost floodplain and lost floodplain continuously through its history, and thus making it a much more interesting and dynamic space where generations of people could truly learn about Wellington Brook and the natural cycles and dynamism of that system.
Well, thank you.
Yep, I think that's it.
I think that's it. And I think we ought to add an image of you, Glenn, in this rendering, because once this gets built, I think you're going to take a permanent home here. But I should mention that Glenn is a resident of Belmont as well. So that is the end of our formal presentation, but we have a number of questions and comments in the chat that we want to respond to. Also just want to mention again that all of the data from all of the feasibility studies and the geotech reports and the structural reports, all that information is on both the library website and the Belmont Library Foundation website. So please feel free to go there. And if you have any difficulty, feel free to reach out to me, and I can help get you any additional information that you may need.
So just to direct our participants, so we will now begin the Q&A section of the night. So if you have questions, if you want to add them into that Q&A, we've added some more panelists, select board members, Adam Dash and Mark Polillo, as well as Town Representative Anne Marie Mahoney, Jeff Birnbaum from CHA, who's been working with us for the last year plus. So we're happy to let Claire field the questions and either answer them or direct them to the right responder. So we'll go through some of that Q&A. And then as we get through the questions, we will hopefully have time for some raised hands and discussion.
So I'm a really slow reader, and this first comment or question is long. Has anyone, Lauren, have you read it to summarize it a little bit so we can respond? I just want to make sure.
I have, Claire.
Okay, thank you.
So Ruth, thank you so much for the dedication to the project. There's a lot of positive language in there about how she wants to see us loud and proud out in the public. Ruth's wondering mostly like, what's our PR effort? What are the plans for the PR effort? You know, she thinks that we've gotten quiet over the last 6 months, is seeing a lot of the rink effort as out in the public and a little less of the library effort. So she's wondering, what's the plan for PR and how are we going to get the word out?
So we do that in a number of ways, and we continue to do that. one is tonight's event. So thank you for attending. And we also report to the select board as well as town meeting, any opportunity that we get. And then we are going to be having more community forums in the fall as we approach that November vote timeframe. So I think we've tried to be out in public as much as possible. Oh, and also I should mention Town Day and Meet Belmont. Any opportunity we get, we're there. So feel free to let us know if there's some opportunities that we're missing. But we have a number of interviews that we've done with Belmont Media, and have articles in the newspaper. And I think you mentioned that you maybe no longer get your newspaper, but that's another source. So we trying to get it out there through every avenue we can.
Okay, so next we got an anonymous question, and the gist of it is how can we be confident in the plans for the new library, given that our library is newer than a lot of the homes that are in Belmont, but yet it seems to be falling apart. They're looking for assurances that we can provide that the building will not develop costly and incapacitating structural problems in 40 years like our building has now. How was the current review process different from the process by which the current building design was reviewed?
So I'll jump in, and then I think Noel will speak to this as well. We're looking to have a 100-year building. That's what we want to design for. So I can't speak to the current building. I'm not sure any of us were involved in that process. If you were, please speak up. But this is not uncommon for buildings of this era. It wasn't it was a great era for music, not so great for buildings, unfortunately. But Noel, do you have some more to add to that?
Yeah, I think what I would add, Claire, is that, and for everyone, we're looking at this building to be as flexible as possible. I think I'd mentioned that we're trying to use things like furniture and shelving to really help define spaces everywhere we can, rather than hard partitions and things that are difficult to move in the future. So we're looking at flexibility as a quality of this building that does help future-proof any building longer term. And as Claire mentioned, the approach here is to design something that's a 100-year building that has a quality of materials and systems that are intended to last for the long haul. I know that the existing building has some structural issues and things, and I don't know the source of those. I know what the problem is, but I don't know, the origin of those decisions when they happened 50 years ago. But we all want this building to be one that lasts as long as possible, and the design, we hope, reflects that.
And I'll just mention too that buildings that last for long periods of time is a sustainable sort of sensibility, and that's something that I think we also take responsibility for. That this is not a building that should need to be repaired in 50 years. It's much longer vision than that.
It's Kathy. I would just add, some of the issues we have with the building today is that it was not designed for its current use. The air conditioning on the roof, it's not spec to carry the amount of books that we're carrying. So, we're a victim of our own success, that people are using the library more than before. They're using it in different ways. So that's where I think the MBLC guidance is so critical, as well as working with architects who design libraries, not only for today, but for the future.
And the next question is about LEED Silver, which I think just to clarify, we're not actually going after the certification, but we want to build to that standard, design to that standard. But also, I think might not have gotten mentioned, but this will be an all-electric building as well, so no fossil fuels. So Nolan, Glenn, there's a little bit more detail in there about some of the aspects of the sustainability features. It says, will you be replacing those trees in a garden space? Oh, I think I might have jumped. Sorry, I jumped to the next one, but it looks like there are a few comments along this line. Can you provide more information on what may be possible for this in areas, e.g. children's wing, outdoor reading areas with native plant, stormwater management, and photovoltaic power, natural light?
I can quickly address the architectural side and then let Glenn talk about the landscape. So although we're not necessarily targeting LEED certification, I mean, I think LEED is a roadmap that we all use now, and we've kind of absorbed it into how we work. And that includes many of the things that you're referring to. So natural light, daylighting is a component of LEED certification and something that we're trying to optimize or maximize in this building. Photovoltaic power, again, something that would get you, help you in LEED, something we're doing here to the best of our ability. But it also includes material selections, mechanical systems, and everything, going as far as bicycle parking on site so that people can arrive, via other modes of transportation. So the roadmap provided by LEED is something we're using. We're just not going through the steps of the certification.
And the cost too, right?
And
the cost saving mechanism to not actually pursue the certification, but just follow through on
right. And that cost is kind of an administrative cost rather than anything that improves the building itself. So in terms of the stormwater and native plants and things, Glenn, would you mind addressing that?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. Two things about the stormwater. We have Wellington Brook here as part of our community, and really just making people aware of it is one of the most important things we can do. But a big part of this effort, admittedly, is going to be invasive removal. So anyone who has taken a little bit of time and walked along this section of the brook will see there's a lot of invasive plants, particularly in the ground plane here. So that'll be step number one in terms of native plant and establishing a real native plant community here, is to handle this invasive plant issue we have. The great news is there's a wonderful canopy of native trees along the brook. There's tulip trees, there's linden trees, there's sugar maples, red maples, silver maples, and a real wonderful canopy of mostly northern red oaks and pin oaks. There's a lot of Norway maples. We'll have to decide what to do with them. There's, a wonderful Dawn redwood in the corner, one of the largest in the area, perhaps in the state. So there's quite a bit of work to do to develop that native palette, but it's something that's going to have to be done over time, and working carefully with Peter and with maintenance procedures to bring native plants in all levels of the canopy and structure of the site. In terms of stormwater, we are going to meet all the requirements for stormwater on site in terms of filtration of water and cleansing of water before it reaches the brook. But more importantly, we're focused on making those cleansing efforts and those stormwater gardens a very visible and teaching component of the landscape. And for instance, the stormwater garden that you see here, thanks Claire, running along the west side of the building, actually comes all the way out to the main entrance on Concord Ave. So that's kind of the signature kind of landscape you're going to see when you enter the building, is this stormwater garden along Concord Ave that runs all the way along the building, leading to a larger basin in the back. So bringing that awareness and visibility of stormwater and the brook all the way out as far as we can to Concord Ave.
Yeah, and I'll just mention about the invasive species. That's another area that we're looking to pursue a CPA grant any way we can to offset costs. Glenn, there's a follow-up question about, replacing the trees. Will we be replacing the trees in a garden space to separate the street and parking? What native trees, which I think you covered just a moment ago, but could they be planted in a courtyard and the storm water infiltration barrier where there are benches?
I'd say that they definitely could be planted. I think maybe it's referring to this. Maybe you can point to that. Maybe the last image.
Here? Oh, okay. I was thinking it was.
I'm thinking it's kind of this foreground image right next to the reading lawn where there are benches. I'm not totally sure if that's right, but it sounded like what was being expressed. And I'd say yes to the question. We definitely will be bringing in more native trees, and that'd be a great spot for them. I think one thing we have to be aware of, the great thing about this side of the library is it's south facing. So you have this wonderful exposure. And when you walk back there today, if you walk along the road and imagine the road gone and the parking gone, you have quite a wide open area with wonderful exposure to the south. So we want to make sure that we bring these trees in and create shade and shelter and additional filtration with their root systems, but also just be very cognizant of making these spaces as functional as possible, that we really extend the season of usability of these outdoor spaces and take advantage of the microclimate that's created by this southern exposure and aspect of the site. So I'd say it's going to change over time. Right now, when this landscape goes in, it's going to be very sunny and open all along the backside of that. And we'll be putting in, medium to small size trees. But as time goes by, it's going to transform. So we'll just have to plan for that transformation over time.
So the next question is about whether there are plans for tiering the design. Sounds like for phasing different stages of construction, or things that can be added later with future support. Oh, it just jumped up for different cost points. And I would say a couple of things. One is that we will include add alternates in the bids, so that if the bids come in really low, then we can gain some of these items, and if not, and we haven't determined exactly what they are, but just speaking hypothetically, or if the bids come in high, then those would be items that would be earmarked for later. So the bidding process allows for some amount of that. In terms of actually phasing the project, that is a much more expensive approach because you're extending construction over many more years. It made a lot of sense for the high school to do that in a phased manner. But I think for the library, we've decided that it's not as fiscally responsible. Question about how often does the brook overflow, and are the designers taking into account the water table? That's a great question. Underwood lawn is usually soggy and wet. Worry about the water. Current library is on a berm. Was built to agree with water table.
Just quickly, Claire, to answer the question about the brook. I've heard many times that the brook has overflowed and it's gone into the parking lot and it's come all the way up to the building almost. And I don't want to say anything I ever heard, I don't believe, but I've been here for 7 years and it's never happened once in the time that I've been here. I do believe it's happened. I do believe it'll happen in the future, but I would say it is a rare occurrence.
Well, good thing also that Glenn and his team have designed in some overflow capabilities to handle that naturally instead of having it do that. But Glenn, you should probably describe that in a little bit more detail, and I'll go up to the image that shows that, I think, best here.
Sure. So that area there, we're proposing, and I'll say, we're in schematic design. We're working with civil engineers, Judith Nitch, civil engineers, to work out all the details and precise measurements for this. But the concept is that some of this will be designed, that section of the landscape will be lowered as I said, 3 or 4 feet to get you closer to that level of the brook, so that some of that space will be used for floodplain capacity, where we could imagine the water flowing through this area on a particular scaled storm, and we would design for that, and that adds capacity to the volume of the storm, or floodwater capacities as it goes through this site. We're going to maintain all the existing access that currently is on the site, and we're going to keep the armoring that goes on, that is there, which is very beautiful. But hopefully in this location, we'd be lowering that to allow for that water to come into this space. And we think that's a very common practice in parks across the country and across the world, really, to acknowledge that when you're next to a river or a stream, they are part of the floodplain. So to design for that in mind is the intention of this space.
And I think that I think that answered the next question, which was a follow-up about high water table on the site and flooding of the brook, and the design reflecting that that capability for flash flooding, and also in the future, 100 years, that we're probably going to see more flooding than less. So I think you covered that there, Glenn. Another question about, does the design provide for power storage on site, or will the PV power all be sold as produced? Will there be backup generator or battery bank? And so my understanding is that we do not have power storage on site, Noel, but do you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so we do not have any kind of large-scale battery backup on site. Power from the PV system would most likely go into the grid. In terms of a backup generator, there is a generator in the building, or on the top of the building. The sizing of that generator is still something that we are kind of scrutinizing. A smaller generator would be sufficient to run mechanical systems in a power outage to prevent pipes from freezing and things like that, or you could invest in a larger generator and use the library as a facility in an emergency situation, or as a warming center. And so that's, I think, still an open question in terms of what the town feels the need is and the opportunity is with this building. But some form of generator will be part of the project.
Okay, next comment is in terms of questions, a lot of positive comments about just considerable effort to make the new library happen. A lot of good spaces and nice touches, but have trouble with the size of the footprint being expanded to the east, the Underwood area, and also having the building closer to the sidewalk on Concord Avenue. This was done at the Armenian Library Museum building next to the post office, which eliminated a nice lawn space and disregards the considerable foot traffic along the avenue. Would it be possible to find more spaces by downscaling the upper space in the commons area, which is nice but wasted, in quotes, so that the building footprint could be reduced slightly? Thanks for your consideration.
So yeah, I mean, it's very, assuming I'll answer this one, perceptive that the building does get much closer to Concord Avenue and the sidewalk. As I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there was a balancing between the building, the parking, and the green space. And the green space isn't simply nice to look at. It's serving an important function in terms of stormwater and protecting the brook. So mixing all of these things together definitely puts some pressure on the siting of the building. But I do think that there is room to continue to massage, the building, the exact perimeter and the size and how it relates to Concord Avenue. It will definitely be tighter than the current library is to the street. But we are conscious of what you're saying, and it's something we want to continue to work on.
Next question is about cost and cost to the taxpayers. We are paying a lot now for the new high school, and people also want a skating rink. How much more can we pay? We have the highest taxes in Massachusetts. The building should have been maintained all these years. Are we going to maintain the new buildings? Probably not. So I don't know that we can speak to the maintenance of it because that's a little bit outside of our scope.
I'm happy to take the cost. Okay, so it's Kathy, and so we've been working with Floyd. You know, we're concerned about the cost too. So I'll give you a couple bits of information. If we have to do a building system repair, the cost to an average taxpayer, according to Floyd Carmen, our town treasurer, is $271 per household. The cost for the new building at a $40 million, which is a bit higher than we're saying, is $361.43. We've already raised $2.67 million. So that brings it to $334. That's a lot of money, but you know that the more we can raise, the more we can offset that cost to the taxpayers. And so I think I look at the difference between what we will pay to do the repairs versus what we will pay for a new building. There's a better value, but no doubt about it, our taxes are incredibly high. And that's why the fundraising is so important. We do have on the library website a calculator so you can calculate the value of the services you're getting from the library. It's a really neat tool. And thank you, Peter. Peter just put it in the chat. So it's a good way to see how you're using the library and what you're saving, and then also to consider what more you could do with in terms of leveraging library services.
I think that's just a great point to mention again, Kathy, that it's not a zero versus, call it $40 million. It's $30 million versus $40 million, where we don't get much, and actually we get less for the 30. So
just quickly, I'm sorry, there is tax debt or burden that will roll off in 2024 and then also in 2027. That amounts to 117 and 27, so about $140 per household. So just offering that. I do know there are other necessary. The rink is a necessary as well.
Next question is about, can you share more about the opportunities for indoor and outdoor use for the space by youth, especially teens? How will the library space appeal to their interests and needs?
So I'll start with the children's wing of the building, and then I'll discuss the teens. So the children's wing of the building is on the ground floor. Really as a matter of convenience and access. There is a dedicated outdoor terrace space right off of the children's room that is only for use of children and only accessed through the library. So it would be enclosed and protected and secure, but it's outside of the building. And there's something really nice about being able to be outdoors, but also not have the kind of the discomfort of people wandering off, kids wandering off. So you could actually do, productive activities with the children while they're in that and using that space. The teens, I feel like we've worked on many libraries, and teens are usually the forgotten user group that's squeezed into, a corner of the adults or the children's section of the building. Here and this was something that kind of developed over time with the building committee, have found, really prominent location in the building for the young adults room, right over the entrance in a very visible location. So in this view, it's on the right-hand side of the image. And so the teens are really given some pride of place in the building. And the space itself is designed to really cater to how a teen would use a library. They're not necessarily there to check out books and reference books the same way an adult would be, or a child might be using the library. I mean, they're there. There's a kind of a component of social activity to study together. And so the space is kind of purposefully made to facilitate that. So it's kind of far into the image off to the left. You can see in red, there's some banquette seating, for teens to gather in kind of an informal way, work, chat, and socialize a bit while they're doing their homework. So those are the things we want to kind of build into the young adult space. I mean, this is really kind of a sketch of what that space could be. There's still a lot of work left to do. And I know Belmont has a fantastic young adults librarian. And so we'll continue to work with her to understand, what teens need in the moment and incorporate that into this space.
We'll try to streamline some of the questions because we are nearing 9 o'clock, but just to answer that there will be bicycle parking, absolutely. In terms of the parking, there's a question about whether the parking in front of the swimming pool has been considered, and I think I'm not quite sure what is meant by that in terms of. I mean, we certainly will in off seasons kind of capitalize on all the parking nearby so that we're not overbuilding parking. That becomes very expensive and it's not a good environmental solution. But then there's also a comment that says, you have a nice design and reasonable cost for the proposed library, but how can we be sure that there's not a large cost overrun? And one of the things that we've done for the library building committee is to build in a very, very sizable contingency of 5% that is strictly, it's on top of every other contingency, not compounding, but that is for these market volatilities, for increase in fuel prices, things that are unknown, and assume could be also used as a buffer for bids being higher in that regard. So we really are trying to be as prudent as possible and safeguarding the project that way. There's another question about the brook does not overflow now that the entrance to the tunnel is being cleared. Just seems to be happening more regularly. There's a question about concern with the wide staircase in the library. Seems like a social space and not a fit for the library.
Claire, can I speak to that one?
Sure.
So the stairs are a social space. That's exactly the point. For those folks here tonight that come into our library regularly, they can attest that we are not a quiet building. We are the 10th busiest library in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts out of almost 400 buildings. The days of the librarians with their hair in buns shushing children, in Belmont anyway, is over. We're very much the community center for the town, the living room of the community, a place to meet your friends, place for families to spend time with their grandparents. We're an incubator for business professionals and a place for community events, talks, programs, meetings. And we will be a destination for large scale events, galas, fundraisers, and more. So underneath that staircase is a storage room. Every library director I talked to in Massachusetts that's completed a building project in the last 5 to 10 years said, we didn't build in enough storage rooms. We don't have enough space for storage. So that is a storage space. It was going to just be a wall on the other side. The nominal cost to add the staircase seemed like a great opportunity to turn that common area in the middle of the library into a space that can double as a program space. So after hours, we can have talks there. We can have galas there and events there. And yeah, during the day, it'll be a place where people meet each other and wait for each other, or where parents sit while they wait for their kids to come out of a program, place to read the newspaper while you're killing time before a meeting. That is the point. It is a social space. And
one last question, which I love this. could edible native shrubs be incorporated in the plant library for cutting snacks for the kids and teens and adults and others? And ecosystem services, e.g. the rain garden, places to walk and gather, read, etc. If people donate materials to keep costs lower potentially. Thank you all. What an interesting idea. I had not thought about that. Glenn, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful idea. And, you know, two of the plants that we think of for this kind of landscape and this kind of environment would be blueberry, high bush blueberry, and shadblow, which are both plants that provide food, but could provide food, a very edible fruit for people and for animals, but in a very kind of informal way. You have to be in the know and know that it's there. But I think that's a great idea, and it's sort of this idea of thinking of different ways a landscape can be sustainable, not just to plants, but for forage for people.
And education too. I mean, I love the library of cuttings later.
Yeah.
Something along those. So Mark Palloa has, I think that's the end of our questions.
That is the end of our questions.
So Mark has his hand up, and I hope that I'm not missing people on other screens, so you all have to keep me honest.
I think we're doing okay. Hi, Mark.
Hi there, how are you tonight? If I might, I wanted to just briefly state congratulations on a wonderful presentation. The library, as outlined tonight by the architects, is gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful and frankly needed. And what I was the most compelling thing, and Claire, I think you said it, we want to build a building for the next 100 years. And I'm thinking about that and saying 50, 60, 70 years from now, and I will no longer be serving on the board. And I will no longer be alive. Thinking to perhaps, you know, my children or their my grandchildren, and walking into that new beautiful library that we will build. I think this town will support it, and saying this is just a great location for us to gather. And so I was very moved by that statement and very moved by the presentation. You have my strongest support for this new library in many ways. I am involved in fundraising. I'm impressed in terms of the fundraising that has taken place so far. We've all been distracted, unfortunately or fortunately, with town meeting, and the business at hand after town meeting will really continue to sort of have a robust fundraising effort. And I think that with all of the folks that are involved there, that the fundraising will be significant and help defray some of the cost to our residents, knowing full well, and my colleagues on the line as well, that, you know, we realize that taxes are high in Belmont. But this is about quality of life for a new library, and I fully support it and look forward to voting to put it on the ballot for debt exclusion in the fall. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me to attend this evening.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Mark.
Mark.
It really means a lot. I think we have completed. We've gotten all the questions or answered all the questions. Does anyone have any last parting words? I do want to be respectful of time, especially for all the hours that many people have put in on town events this past week and Monday.
Can I just add as well, Claire, that I know we, the building committee, are tracking all the comments that we're getting with folks. There, you know, all the input is critical, and we want to make sure that we're bringing it forward into the next phase, the design phase, post a vote. So comments are welcome, appreciated, and we commit to bringing them forward and considering them and addressing them with you.
So I'll thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks to the very great group of panelists too. Apologies to those that we asked to join us because we might have had questions to direct your way that didn't get any questions, but having you here made us all happy and feel confident that we had the right group to answer all the right questions. This won't be the last open public forum. I believe there'll be more to come before November, whether in this form or another. So we do want to thank everybody for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.